Hello, I want to talk to you today a little more about RHIZOME. I'm basing myself on the separate book version of RHIZOME that was published in French in 1976. It's 74 pages long. It begins page 7, so it's 67 pages long. You can see if you're watching the video that there are sort of small pages. So in the book version, one page of this text might represent half a page in 1,000 plateaus. I have already considered the incipit, the first paragraph of RHIZOME, and today I want to go on to the next paragraph that I call the missing paragraph about psychoanalysis. There are several differences between the separate book version of RHIZOME and the version that was included in 1,000 plateaus. Some minor modifications and rewriting, a few insertions or deletions of sentences here and there, but there are a few paragraphs that were omitted in the 1,000 plateaus version, and there were a couple of paragraphs that were added. So I want to consider the first missing paragraph, and I'm calling it a paragraph, but at the end of the first paragraph in the 1,000 plateaus version, it ends, "We are no longer ourselves, each will know his own. We have been aided, inspired, multiplied." The second paragraph in that version begins, "A book has neither object nor subject. It is made of variously formed matters." So in between the end of the first paragraph and the beginning of the second paragraph is a whole development about psychoanalysis and why they don't want to talk about psychoanalysis anymore, and about argument, refutations and objections and to their project and their attitude towards them. So this long development, which goes from page 8, all along page 8, to the first few lines of page 9, are continuous with what is the beginning of paragraph 2 in the 1,000 plateaus version. So it's not printed as a separate paragraph. It's continuous with the second paragraph, and it begins the second paragraph, but because it's been cut out and we have the second paragraph as we know it, that's enough to consider it as a missing paragraph. I'm going into these details because I'm in harmony with the message of the book, because they say one of the things that you must do when you're reading a book, or writing as well, is to quantify writing, and they give several criteria for the quantification of writing. But I think it's worthwhile going into some of this page and paragraph quantification and the quantification between the different editions and so on, because it can help some of the less apparent meaning to emerge. So this missing paragraph divides into two, and because there are two themes, so I'll translate off the cuff, although I prepared. The first half, I'll just read it and respond to that, and then in a second video I will read and I'll translate. I'll read my translation of the second half. So this is the part that explicitly talks about their attitude towards psychoanalysis, and so this part was omitted in 1000 Plateaus. We no longer speak much about psychoanalysis. However, we still do speak about it, and we speak too much about it. Nothing at all happens with psychoanalysis. Nothing at all happens, nothing at all is happening. There's nothing that traverses psychoanalysis at this moment. Plus rien ne passe par là. We were profoundly tired or fed up by psychoanalysis, but we were in the incapacity, we were incapable of stopping straight away. Psychoanalysts, and above all the psychoanalyzed, bore us too much. This matter, which was slowing us down, is something that we had to precipitate, so to speed up, for our own account, without having any illusion about the objective scope of such an operation. We had to communicate to it, or impart to it, an artificial speed capable of bringing it up to the point of rupture, or of cracking, or of a crack-up for us. It's finished. We will no longer speak about psychoanalysis at all after this book. No one will suffer from that, neither them nor us. Okay, this is an interesting paragraph. It goes in line with what we said about the first paragraph, the incipit, that without actually going over the same ground that they covered in AntiOedipus, they're implicitly calling back to that, calling back to the sort of critical demolition or deconstruction or dismantling of psychoanalysis, and drawing the ultimate conclusion that they're no longer going to talk about psychoanalysis, but they're going to use the concepts that they developed in AntiOedipus, and I would argue even more important for what comes after, the concepts that they developed in the book on Kafka, which probably should be considered the real introduction to 1000 Plateaus, although I think it would need to be de-Kafkaized to make that apparent, and maybe I'll be doing that in another series of videos. So all this seems pretty simple. We no longer speak much about psychoanalysis. However, we still do speak about it, and too much. Is that true? It's true in RHIZOME. They speak very little about psychoanalysis. They speak about it a little, but nowhere near as much as in AntiOedipus. In 1,000 Plateaus as a whole, there are a couple of chapters that are mainly about psychoanalysis and their sort of replacement concepts. But overall, it's not in terms of the object of discussion. It's not a psychoanalytic book either. I'd just like to take a closer look at the grammatical form. Maybe I'll just read one more sentence. So we no longer speak much about psychoanalysis. However, we still speak about it too much. Nothing is happening there. I'm tempted to say nothing important is happening there anymore. I wanted to include that sentence because it'll influence how I interpret the preceding sentence. So nothing is happening there. What does that mean? There's lots of, at that time, there were lots of psychoanalysts. People were getting psychoanalyzed. People were suffering. There was also the big, the psychic misery, maybe not as intense and as widespread as today. But the psychic misery was there. People who had sort of invested their hopes in May 68 and political militancy were turning towards psychoanalysis as a way of continuing their struggle, at least on the subjective level, while giving up the hope of actually accomplishing a real revolution, or maybe as a supplementary arm because the revolution failed, trying to figure out how to get stronger and clearer to succeed the next time round. So things were happening, but when we talk about things happening for Deleuze and Guattari, they're talking about events in their sense, and so they're talking about deterritorialization. So their thesis, which they said in several places when they're talking about AntiOedipus, is that at that time the people and the movements they were in were more deterritorialized than what psychoanalytic practice and theory was operating, or was offering. The deterritorializing potential of psychoanalysis had been overcoded and put inside a psychoanalytic theoretical doxa and the psychoanalytic institutions. So they've been contractualized and institutionalized and codified, and people, according to Deleuze and Guattari, were making a big mistake if they thought that psychoanalysis could aid them in their own path of deterritorialization, conceived as becoming or maintaining the state of being revolutionary. So when they say nothing is happening there, they mean it's things are happening, formally speaking, but it's just not up to the level of deterritorialisation of the rest of society. I'm saying that because I've got a certain concern with the beginning of the first sentence. Nous ne parlons plus beaucoup de psychanalyse. We no longer speak much about psychoanalysis. It's the we that I want to comment on. I pointed out in the previous video that the book begins with we. We wrote AntiOedipus together. In the English translation, it's written, the two of us wrote AntiOedipus together. So we've got the us, but it's quite, given the importance that a beginning for Deleuze and Guattari is not a preparatory starting point. We're in the middle of things, and the first word is we. So I saw this repetition of the we for the beginning of the second paragraph. The second paragraph in the separate version of RHIZOME. We missed that repetition in the Thousand Plateaus version, where the second paragraph begins with a book. So I looked at the occurrences of we in the book version, the separate book version of RHIZOME. So if we take the beginning, the introduction, not just the incipit, but the introduction to RHIZOME itself, it's on pages, in the French, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's 12 pages, and it ends with writing has nothing to do with signifying, but with surveying, map making, even of realms to come. That's the end of the introduction to RHIZOME, 12 pages. Just to get a comparison, in the Thousand Plateaus version, that's 2.5 pages, to give you an idea of the size of the pages and the quantity of text when I'm citing the French separate version. So I looked at that introduction, and there are, in the French version, 25 occurrences of the word we, of nous, in fact. So it could be we, it could be us sometimes. I forget how many there are in the English version, but far less, really far less. And so I looked at the whole book of RHIZOME. In the whole book, nous, we, or us, occurs 95 times in French. In the French version of A Thousand Plateaus, with the omission of several passages from the separate version of RHIZOME, it only occurs 65 times, nous. And in the English translation, just of the chapter RHIZOME, we occurs only 54 times. So we've gone down from 95 in the separate French book to 65 times in the RHIZOME chapter in French to 54 times, almost half. So that may or may not be important stylistically or conceptually or atmospherically, but I would argue at least that atmospherically we're not getting the same impression in English as in French. Why is that? Perhaps conceptually important, stylistically as well, in the sense of style for Deleuze and Guattari, where the style of the enunciation is not to be separated from the conceptual content in a rhizome. So there's an impression that I have, which is that while it seems pretty clear at the beginning when they say we two wrote, the two of us wrote AntiOedipus together, it does begin with a we, and I think there's the beginning of an inclusion of the reader in the we. We're being invited to sort of include ourselves in that we, even though they're mainly talking about themselves as the not necessarily biographical subjects, but as the what they call the operators of the text. So I would say that the we is part of their process of deterritorializing the style and the content of the book. So this is why I wanted to comment about nothing is happening in psychoanalysis, as meaning that at that point in time, psychoanalysis was not deterritorialized enough. They're beginning the first paragraph when this talks about how each of us is several, and that makes already a crowd, and we are no longer ourselves. These are all statements that the authors or the writers of the book are deterritorialized subjects, and as such on at least a process of inclusion of the reader, that we're not to read the book as an individual subject reading an object, the book. To confirm that a little, there's an interesting text written presented first orally in 1973, and it's called it's just by Deleuze, and it's called nomadic thought is how they translate. I would say nomad thought, and it was at the Colloque de Cerisy, and so it's in the collection of Deleuze's essays, Desert Islands and other texts, and he talks at this stage. He's talking about Nietzsche, but he's already preparing the criteria and the parameters for the later work with Guattari, and he discusses how Nietzsche is the creator or the beginning aspect of a new type of book. And the book is, this new type of book is not based on the law or the contract or the institution, which are the modes of mediation between the reader and the book in previous modes of relating to the book. And he calls that, it's on page 255 in the English version of Desert Islands, it's being in the same boat. Perhaps the only conceivable equivalent is something like being in the same boat, something of Pascal turned against Pascal, where in the same boat, a sort of lifeboat, bombs falling on every side, the lifeboat drifts towards subterranean rivers of ice or toward rivers of fire, etc. We're not even supposed to like one another. We fight, we eat each other. Everyone pulling an oar is sharing something beyond any law, any contract, any institution. A drifting movement or deterritorialization. So that's how Deleuze was describing Nietzsche's new type of book, and this description pretty much applies to at least the collaborations with Guattari. So retrospectively AntiOedipus, prospectively Kafka, RHIZOME, and 1000 Plateaus. Maybe, although the style is a little different, but I suppose we must include what is philosophy. It's translated as to be in the same boat, or being in the same boat. In French, it's être embarqué avec, to be or being embarked with. The connotations there are perhaps better, even if the translation is a little more awkward in English than in French, although it's a little awkward as an expression in French as well. Being embarked with, there's a sort of passive sense that you're not doing the embarking, you're being embarked. And he defines this being embarked, which is the state of the reader, or the position of the reader in relation to Nietzsche's text, and by extension to Deleuze's own text and Deleuze and Guattari's text. I say position with a little feeling of hesitation, because we know that for Deleuze everything is movement and flux and becoming, but being crouched on a raft that is careening down a river, or that is being pushed around on the sea, it's a position, but it's a position in movement. So this idea of being embarked with is, for me, the zone of indetermination between the writers and the readers, because as we read, we co-create. We read anew the text, and so we're embarked with, we're sharing something beyond law, contract, and institution, and we're drifting in a drifting movement, and as Deleuze says explicitly, we're deterritorialized. So for me, the nous, the we, that crops up so much in the separate version of RHIZOME is nous, we of a zone of indetermination, of a deterritorialization of the identities and of authors and readers, and a circulation, a sharing between these poles or these instances. Obviously, there is a sort of that's the big high ontological explanation, and that's important because from the very beginning they're deconstructing all of the terms that they're using in terms of the new ontology that they're proposing and acting out at the same time. So there's another interpretation, but they're convergent. Is this book, 93 occurrences or 95 occurrences of the word we, of the word nous, is insisting on the fact that it's Deleuze and Guattari, with the emphasis on the and, by the way. And it's no use trying to sort of sort out and say, oh yeah, Deleuze wrote this, that's Guattari coming in, Deleuze is sublimating what Guattari said or trying to tone it down. Guattari is trying to shake things up a little more here. This is more philosophical, this is more psychoanalytical. This the emphasis on the nous is to get away from all those considerations. They're irrelevant for Deleuze and Guattari. In fact, I think they're very interesting, and it's a legitimate, but I would say secondary concern most of the time. But it's a legitimate concern, and I don't see why we should be intimidated by Deleuze and Guattari's negative injunction, their prohibition against looking at who's who in what places and who did what. They're supposedly nominalist, so they're alchemical or machinic. Things are working together and producing new things, and identities don't exist. At the same time, there is here now in this place in the text who is doing what. And that's part of what they call the quantification of writing, and I consider that it's legitimate. So from this deterritorialization of the subject, they're implicitly claiming that they themselves are speaking from a position in the sense that I just stipulated, of a position as sitting or squatting or standing on a raft in the middle of a river or on the high seas with threatening or favourable performances of the elements and of any tribes and populations in the surroundings. So they're presenting themselves as here in RHIZOME being more deterritorialized than psychoanalysis. That's why they don't talk about it anymore. It was useful to them. They did read it a lot. They did talk about it a lot. But at this stage in their process, nothing is happening in psychoanalysis for them and for their associated environment of readers, because we're all supposedly more deterritorialized than psychoanalysis itself. We can ask if that's true today, because this book was published in 1975. That's 45 years ago. I read it not long after. I read it for the first time in 1979. So something wrong with my arithmetic there. I read it 43 years ago, and it was published in 1976. So it was published 46 years ago. Have things changed? There's a lot of sort of push and buzz about psychoanalysis in the wake of the Zizek event, if you want. Zizek and the other names around Zizek, like Mladen Dolar, Zupančič, that sort of subsidiary guy, Todd McGowan, and a few others who are even subsidiary. They're sort of making a lot of noise. They're publishing. It's a phenomenon, but that's just a little internet and academic or university bubble. And to the extent that something is happening, it's once again the application of what I would call deterritorializing procedures to psychoanalysis. That is the privileging of Lacan and of the most deterritorializing concepts in Lacan, and the reworking of all that by means of Hegel, with a sort of deterritorializing understanding of Hegel and absolute knowledge. My thesis for a long time has been that negativity, as developed in their Hegelo-Lacanian synthesis, negativity can be equated, there's a sort of a trade-off, but can be equated with deterritorialization. So insofar as there is something happening today anew in psychoanalysis, it's because deterritorialized thinking is being used to rework psychoanalysis and catch up with the world that has been deterritorializing, at least on some axes, even further, despite the various reterritorializations that are constantly being applied. We were deeply fed up, but incapable of stopping straight away. So there's an external reason for that they couldn't even say anything. I don't think they could have published RHIZOME or 1000 Plateaus without having published AntiOedipus. They had to sort of revision the whole psychoanalytic establishment, both practical and theoretical, to clear away the conceptual space for their later work. And at the same time, because that's not just an external house cleaning procedure, it's an internal one as well. Deleuze and Guattari, and they're quite honest about it, they're indebted to psychoanalysis for letting them get to where they got. But I would add, amongst other things. and there's no reason why psychoanalysis in that sort of multiplicity should have tried to be the hegemonic force. So they were fed up because by the time they were writing AntiOedipus, they were already beyond the modes of thinking and the types of concepts that were being employed in psychoanalysis. So it was obligatory, yet at the same time, it was a task they felt was imposed on them, and so it was not the full expression of their deterritorialized creativity. But at the same time, you can't just deterritorialize directly. That's another thesis of AntiOedipus and of RHIZOME and of 1000 Plateaus. If you try and just deterritorialize abruptly, you explode, or you die, or you just write crap. So they had to go slowly. Psychoanalysts and the psychoanalyzed bore us too much. So this is sort of studying the same thing. They're trying to be provocative in tone, but behind that there's the idea of not just the event, but of the affect. And the affects for them that go with psychoanalysis are boredom and a feeling of duty, an imposed duty, and so something to get rid of. It may well be that this boredom is in line with one trap that can crop up in psychoanalysis, the monotony of interpretation that can come up within an analysis itself and within the theory. It's just going on and on, repeating the same old moves, the same old ideas and insights, and as monotonous and repetitive as it gets, it loses in insight, in real revelatory, emancipatory insight and intensity. So there's a sort of danger of a withdrawal of affect. All those things have been mapped out by psychoanalysis, and they've developed their own responses, but it's a never-ending danger. And this accusation of boringness, monotony, repetition can be turned back against Deleuze and Guattari themselves. I mean, are they always interesting and full of new insights on every single page of everything they write? Is what is philosophy as interesting and insightful as the books that they published before? Or can we say perhaps not that nothing is happening, but that less is happening in that book and in Deleuzean scholarship that came after? Can we say that the same thing, that maybe there was a sort of upsurge of interesting, exciting work, and that a monotony of repetition crept in? And could we say that nothing much is happening in Deleuzean scholarship or Deleuzean thought, and that's why Zizek, Zupanchik, Dollar, and the sub ones have come to have more appeal or clout or attention, because on the first go through, they seem to break out of that monotony. Although I would say the amount of new insight per page on Zizek at his most loquacious is probably far lower than in what is philosophy. But there is quite a lot of new ideas, new perspectives, and new feelings, conceptual feelings and affects about things in Zizek's work. This matter which slowed us down, or which was slowing us down, was something that we had to speed up for our own account. So they're getting back to their materialist reading of philosophy and of theoretical work. It's a matter, and ultimately there's a formed matter or an unformed matter. We have to quantify its form or formlessness or dissipation of form, quantify its density and so on. I'll come to that a little later. And above all, for them at this moment, they have to quantify the speed, which is an ambiguous notion to manipulate, but they need to quantify the speed, and that goes with their idea of deterritorialisation. I mean, it's only a first step, because this is psychoanalysis is slowing us down. We needed to impart a new speed to it. We needed to accelerate it. We have to. This is an accelerationist idea in the realm of theory. So it's noetic acceleration, not institutional or economic acceleration or technological acceleration. We had to noetically accelerate psychoanalytic matter to speed it up to the level that it's useful to us, to precipitate it for our own account. So how do you speed up ideas? One way, and this is the way they've taken at the beginning of RHIZOME, is, despite not referencing themselves and saying that they're free to change from book to book and so on, they're alluding to AntiOedipus, and they're taking the products of all their arguments and discussions there to be the new starting points for their new reflections. So we've got a condensate. We've got some really concise ultimate products of the movement that swept them through AntiOedipus. So that's one form of acceleration. And with that, they think as well that they'll be able to deal with whatever problems they consider more easily, in a quicker and cleaner fashion, without all the repetition and the weaving around in a sort of complex theoretical collegial network. Okay, here once again, there's a qualification that I've been sort of implicitly putting in myself when I say nothing was happening at that time, in that place, for them. They say they have to accelerate the matter contained within psychoanalysis for their own account, without us having any illusions about the objective scope of such an operation. So it's not objective. Their final criticism is to relativize their own critiques. They're saying, this is what we needed. This is how we accelerated things to the point that things started happening again. But there's nothing objective about that. You could very well, from their point of view, have accelerated psychoanalysis from within and kept to psychoanalysis and talked about psychoanalysis and been excited about psychoanalysis instead of bored. And as long as you were making things happen, or things were happening to you, or some co-operational synthesis of the two, that's perfectly fine by their criteria. And their criteria that they're going to develop later. But we've already said the event, the new, speed, and deterritorialisation. As they go, we're already picking up contextually the criteria that they're using, and they will make explicit as they go along. We had to impart an artificial speed capable of bringing it, that is to say, bringing psychoanalysis to the point or up to rupture. I put in point. Deleuze doesn't like points, but I think there are turning points and so on in Deleuze. So up to the point of rupture or of cracking, or crack-up, we could say, because that's another term that Deleuze uses. Here it's craquement. Crack-up is failure, but it is the cracking up that Deleuze and Guattari make virtual synonyms of rupture. So we had to impart to psychoanalysis an artificial speed capable of bringing it to the point of rupture or of cracking up for us. So once again, there's the for us, there's the subjectivity included in the whole process and its description and its theorization. It's not for all people everywhere and for all time, but it is untimely. So if it's untimely, it's recurrent. So it may be that in other places, in other times, or later on in their own country, psychoanalysis can have things happening, be even rich in events and speeds, but that may wear out too, and this recurrent, untimely operation of giving new speeds, of accelerating things to get to get out of the monotony and out of the repetition and into newness again, may well be perpetually or recurrently necessary. It's finished. We will no longer speak about psychoanalysis at all after this book. That's a lie. They do speak about psychoanalysis in A Thousand Plateaus. It's true after Deleuze published Logic of Sensation on Francis Bacon, the cinema books. There's no mention of psychoanalysis at all there. The Foucault book, maybe there's a little snide remark about psychoanalysis inside the Foucault book, or I don't know, maybe. But that's all. And in the Leibniz book, then they're together again for What is Philosophy, doesn't reference psychoanalysis. Guattari stayed at practicing whatever, psychoanalyst in some sense, but he moved on to, he did talk about psychoanalysis a lot after, so this claim, this prophetic affirmation is not as true as that, but he did move on to his more ecosophical conceptualization as a replacement discipline of thought, at least, to psychoanalysis. So it's 3/4 true, this statement. So it's finished. We will not speak about psychoanalysis at all anymore after this book. No one will suffer, neither them nor us. So is that true? No one will suffer. Once again, an important affect for Deleuze. Or Deleuze wants to get away from the sad affects, and he wants people to feel joy for reading his work. But that's a sort of joke as well. The right people are meant to feel joy, and the wrong people are meant to suffer. So probably hoped in AntiOedipus and Guattari as well that the psychoanalysts would suffer as a sort of creative depression that could give them a point of rupture or of cracking. But none of this, they're not concerned enough about their own silence because they think nobody will miss they're talking about psychoanalysis. That's sort of half true and half false. When AntiOedipus came out, Lacan gave out the order. Whatever you do, don't talk about the book. He sort of was treating them as trolls before the internet use of the word troll. So he was treating them as trolls and saying, no, they're trolls, don't talk about them, don't give any attention or libido to them, and they'll supposedly, theoretically, they'll just disappear. Well, they didn't disappear. They came on to achieve not just the renown of the moment in France, but world renown. But thanks to Lacan's blockade procedure, psychoanalysis was able to go on without talking about AntiOedipus, and so without any real concern about what Deleuze and Guattari could or could not say after that book. This is a frequent phenomenon with incommensurable theories. They developed an incommensurable ontology. Deleuze and Guattari developed their own ontology, and so their own analysis of psychic processes. And at the beginning, there's a sort of a fluid back and forth between concepts, and the clear identities are not fully determinate. And when the new incommensurable theory is fully made explicit in the full light of its incommensurability, this sort of polemical phase is outdated. The two paradigms, if you want to call them paradigms, are so incommensurable that each becomes irrelevant to the other. So that's if you're looking at it from a really structuralist point of view. And we know that, in fact, there are people going back and forth between the two, or incapable of deciding, or that Zizek, despite what he says, stole lots of stuff from Deleuze, or in fact sometimes he says it. And these incommensurable theories are not hermetically sealed off from each other, but there is this sort of effect of mutual irrelevance that Deleuze is declaring at this point, Deleuze and Guattari, despite in the preceding part of that paragraph making that declaration relative to the state of psychoanalysis. Are things happening there or not? And by implication to the state of their own theory. Are things happening in Deleuze or Guattarian theory or scholarship or not? And making that relative to the state of deterritorialization, or the extent of deterritorialization in these rival theories. Obviously, once you get really deterritorialized, you're not going to maintain that structural incommensurability, and also relativizing that by implication to the degree of deterritorialization in the world or in the environment that is relevant to those theories. So when they say no one will suffer, neither them nor us, it's true on the first glance, but then maybe the world in the type of harmful deterritorialization that it has come to needs all the theoretical forces that it can, and maybe these supposedly incommensurable theories and ontologies need to be, if not combined and synthesized, need to talk to each other and develop a sort of approach to their possible common ground that is what people need to go forward with whatever is happening for them and to them now. So that's my conclusion for this first half of the missing second paragraph.